I am Nana van Tilburg for National Security News. The African National Congress, Nelson Mandela's Liberation Party, is facing a historic moment as it appears poised to lose its outright majority in South Africa's elections. And joining me to discuss the implications of this potential outcome is Chris Vandome, a senior research fellow at the African program at Chatham House. Hi, Chris. So nice to have you in our studio.
Hi, Linda. It's good to be back. Good to see you.
Well, what a historic day. I mean, we all thought it's going to be quite interesting. But, I mean, the ANC, if I look at sort of projections at the moment, they could drop by 15%, a collapse of 15%.
Yeah, I think that the reality of this is starting to hit home now. In the build-up to the election, we had a lot of polling suggesting that the ANC were going to do badly, and some of it saying that they were going to do this badly. And so it was kind of expected, but now that we are actually seeing it come through, it's kind of this reality drop. And, if you look at kind of who's projecting what, the CSIR is saying 42, ENCA is saying, I think 45, and various other people are saying somewhere in between. But, that's a big drop off, and it's going to make a difference because where we're seeing kind of some of the divisions within the opposition parties, is going to make a difference in that for the ANC to get above the 50%, to be able to vote for Parliament to vote in a president in 2 weeks' time, they're going to need those numbers. And so now we're all kind of glued to the screen to see what's going to happen. But it's starting to hit home, and some of the conversations that were happening before Wednesday, where there were informal conversations between some of the parties around kind of just testing each other out over who was going to work with who and what kind of issues might they be able to work together on. This is no longer a hypothetical. This is now real, and they're having to do it all again.
So we'll have to discuss the Umkhonto weSizwe party of Jacob Zuma. Did he kill the ANC? Because he first did it inside. He was a wrecking ball inside with corruption, and he got, this relationship he had with the Gupta brothers. And now from the outside, he is taking the support of the ANC, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, but also in other provinces where there are Zulu-speaking voters.
Yeah, I think that what he's been able to do is mobilize Zulu-speaking voters in a way that even Inkatha Freedom Party as a ethno-nationalist Zulu party had never been able to do. So that has been a big shock. And I think one of the things that, the narrative around Zuma before this election was that a couple of months ago when it all first started happening, there was this big wave and everyone started kind of saying, oh my goodness, that you look what's on the horizon. But as we got closer to the election, it actually looked like some of the momentum was dropping. And a lot of analysts were saying, well, actually, it's one thing to be able to play this victim narrative and the world is against me and I'm one of you, and look at the system and the system is against us. It's one thing as an individual to be able to play that narrative, but to be able to do it for a party, to gain support and to get people to actually vote for it. A lot of analysts were saying, they won't be able to convert when it gets into the ballot box. And so one of the interesting things this week is that it looks like they have. Now, it comes with the caveat that some of the early results that were coming through from KwaZulu-Natal were particularly coming from areas where MK had stronger support, and also where MK did have some very effective individual mobilizers on the ground. So, I think we need to wait and see for the final result, but certainly in the interim, that's the big talking point, is that look at what Jacob Zuma's been able to do. But I think he's also put a dent into the EFF as well. I think that the EFF would have been really hoping to capitalize a lot more on some of the anti-Ramaphosa and anti-ANC sentiment. And this leaves the EFF, if we see a continuation of where the figures are starting to come through now, looks like the EFF are going to, kind of plateau in an area where they've been before, rather than really kind of boost support and become one of the kind of bigger parties.
So what about the centrist opposition parties? they did a little bit better, but they didn't make a real impact, apart from in the Western Cape. The Democratic Alliance seems to be holding, and they might stay in power.
Yeah, it looks like the DA is going to hold on to the Western Cape, and it looks like, again, very early numbers, and we haven't really seen the big metros come through yet, but it looks like the DA are going to perhaps even do a little bit better than some are expecting. You know, a lot of people were saying that they might not even be able to get what they got in 2019, and it looks like that they might actually do a little bit better than they did in 2019. Continue that trend of being able to get support outside of Western Cape. You know, this is a party that has really tried over the last kind of 5-10 years to grow a base beyond its kind of traditional core within the Western Cape. You know, one of the things that they really fall short on, and it's down to a lot of the internal party ideology and the discussions that are happening in the party, is it's all very good and well to have a position against broad-based black economic empowerment and the problems that has caused in terms of kind of hiring and firing and some of the economic problems that, you know, have emanated from that policy. But I think a lot of urban voters up here in Johannesburg, you know, people want, irrespective of color and background, I think there is an acceptance that, you know, in South Africa, you kind of have to go to the polls with a plan for some kind of restitution, some kind of plan to you know, rebalance some of the problems of the past. And people feel that the DA is still falling short on that policy front. So perhaps they're still struggling to get up into, you know, push into the 30s. But, you know, I think that they're going to see themselves now as a possible player in a coalition formation. And, you know, there will be, you know, it looks like we're going to see a push on that centrist line of saying, you know, look, we're the party that if you align with us, you know, is going to quell the storm in the international markets, which has, you know, huge volatility in the rand over the last couple of days with all of this uncertainty. I think the DA are going to come in and say, look, we're the ones that can help on that front in terms of a lot of policy and kind of, you know, maintaining the kind of cap on fiscal spending and a kind of mature economic policy. They're going to be the ones saying, look, we're the ones that, you know, the two of us working together, this is what can help, you know, boost the economy and pull through the kind of the difficult times that South Africa has found itself in. You know, whether or not that message is going to land within the whole of the ANC, you know, it's going to be really, really difficult. You know, the politics there are going to be really difficult to broker that deal. But, you know, certainly, you know, there are bits of the ANC that will find it very, very uncomfortable to be looking to MK or to EFF for a deal, because, you know, the ANC is a very, very proud political movement, and that dog does not want to be wagged by its tail. And that's what, you know, a lot of those older guard will be thinking of. Well, if we let the young Julius back in, he's going to be telling us what to do, and we're the big ones here, and we're not going to let that happen. So it's really complicated, not just between the parties, but even inside the parties at the moment.
Well, we talked about the fact that the markets react quite badly to what is happening. I look at the rand. The rand dropped by 2.3% or something like that, and the banking shares they've dropped quite a bit, because I think there is the fear of nationalization. Because if the ANC forms a coalition with the Economic Freedom Front, they are in favor of nationalization of the banks, of many of the industries, and so is the MK party. So is that a real fear?
It is, and I think that, you know, a couple of weeks ago I was in London and talking to people, and that's the question that everybody had. This so-called tail end risk, you know, tail end risk, a term often used in the banking sector, but is now everybody, you know, is now talking about this tail end risk of the EFF in coalition. I think if that's the direction that things go, you would need to see an ANC really pushing on the line of this is continuity and consistency. You'd need to see them saying we are, as the ANC, are still the biggest party by a long way. it looks like they could be 20 percentage points ahead of the next biggest party, and they could be getting more than 4 times the number of votes as the EFF. So you'd need them to say, we are the biggest, we are the strongest political force in the country, and our continuation in power is as much about continuity as it is about pluralism and new voices coming through. So I think that the ANC would need to really get that out early, and I think that there would need to be a clear policy framework that investors could see, saying, okay, we accept that, this is the coalition that's on the table. Now we want to see some safeguards, because there is some stuff in that EFF manifesto that really, they do not want to see materialize and be kind of put through and brought into action. And then, and for Western investors as well, it's not just about, nationalization of mines and banks or land expropriation, and it's not just, they say nationalization of strategic industries. Well, that leaves it up into interpretation, and who knows what they would define as strategic over the course. So there's that whole thing of uncertainty. But beyond that, there's also policy on energy, where it's a open and strong alignment with Russia on its foreign policy, and open for a nuclear deal with Russia, which for Western investors is still very much seen as a corruption tap. And that alignment with Russia will start making it very difficult for some of the Western investors to be able to justify to their boards why are we in South Africa. And it will suddenly increase a lot of the paperwork, because it would just increase the risk that international investors in South Africa are in some way going to be exposed to Russian businesses or Russian sanctioned companies, and it's going to make things very complicated. So those are the reasons why I think that even though you've got a big political force coupling with a much smaller one, that's why everyone's very, very spooked, because there's a lot of uncertainty in there.
Well, apart from how the markets are reacted, how should we politically or geopolitically look at South Africa if Ramaphosa is not in control anymore? Because people were starting to doubt his allegiances. How should the international community, the West, view South Africa?
I think that South Africa has a big role in international relations, and then I think it needs to take itself a bit more seriously sometimes, and know that people are looking, people are watching, and it does need to create a kind of consistency and it's going to have to work really hard now to present itself as a consistent and irrespective of what line it takes, just to say, okay, this is our line and this is what we're going to do. So the international community have something there to read, to engage with, to know, okay, this is what their line is. Because whatever happens, it's very likely that within a coalition government, things are going to become very inward looking. South Africa's ability to kind of project itself in the region or on the world stage is going to reduce quite significantly. I think we've got to acknowledge that under the first term of Ramaphosa, actually there were some successes. There were some misses, but there were some hits. And so, Ramaphosa was an important part of the African Initiative for Peace in Ukraine. Okay, Western partners of South Africa would have wanted perhaps to see South Africa taking a stronger line around sovereignty and territorial integrity. But, anyone who knows the history of South Africa, support for liberation, and how, a lot of that is being, there's a lot of historical revisionism around that at the moment, around those old linkages. But, it doesn't surprise people that South Africa has taken the line that it does. And it was really important for that initiative. South Africa has been very proud of its role as being the host of BRICS last year, as the BRICS that, changed BRICS. We're now talking about expansion of BRICS. So would a coalition government be able to continue that? Well, probably, but in a less assertive way, and it's not going to be so much of a priority. But I think for most parties, this idea of reforming the international system to allow the global South and countries like South Africa to play a greater role or to have their voice heard, that's in everybody's interests. Okay, the alignment of who's entering BRICS now and the relationship with Iran versus its relationship with Saudi Arabia and so on, that's going to make things complicated. Also on BRICS, you've got a situation where by presiding over this expansion, South Africa's actually diluted its own position within it. South Africa had this opportunity to be a small country with these 4 big economies and big international players, and by bringing in a lot of others, it's kind of diluted its own position. But it's an important, part of the foreign policy, and I think we'd see some continuity. The ICJ case, look, the issue around Palestine has been, is probably the only foreign policy issue that would really influence people's voting behavior in South Africa. Even Russia-Ukraine is not really something that gets felt domestically. And South Africa, as you know, has a very, its political environment, very politicized, but foreign policy issues don't really impact people's voting. But the Palestine question really does, because it's about identity and identities that are shared between South Africans and Palestinians and South Africans and Israelis. And there's a lot of shared, emotion there. It's an area where a lot of South Africans do feel that, they have a moral authority on issues around apartheid or genocide or, these labels that they're placing on what's going on there. They're doing so because they feel they have a moral authority. And then you've got parties like the DA who are very, came up very pro-Israel, but then have had to soften their position because, Western Cape is, their voter base is very diverse in terms of kind of religious background. And, it's like, yeah, guys, you rein it in, bring it down. There's no need for you to take a strong line on this because it's not you reflect the patchwork of your constituency. So I think that something like the ICJ case, under a future government, you'll still have these moments where South Africa takes pride in being able to have a voice on the international stage. They just might try it a little bit less often. And other things that have been going on in the background that have been quite positive. The ANC is taking an important line in Sudan. It's one of many interlocutors. There's a lot of international partners in Sudan at the moment trying to either broker deals or stoke tensions. There are some negative, malign actors at play there. But, it is important that as a continental power, South Africa is part of that. And I think that that's an issue that isn't particularly controversial, and so there can be some continuity. And I think that, again, reflecting on some of the successes that we've seen, the Pretoria process for the cessation of hostilities in Ethiopia, that was something that South Africa played an important role in. Former Deputy President Mzila Mlambo-Ngcuka was important in that, working with Obasanjo, Kenyatta, Mike Hammer from the US. So these kind of things that have been happening behind the scenes, this isn't something that, political parties have specific views on, but, are small areas that we would like to see some continuity from South Africa going forward. The big division points are going to be on Ukraine and UN voting on Ukraine. So, the parties have come out saying that, the ANC, we're all for a mediated peace process, which kind of suggests, well, we are not going to be, we're going to continue to abstain in the UN. The DA, we would vote for, we will vote positively for UN resolutions. So taking South Africa much more into a direction aligned with the US and the West. And the EFF saying, no, the war in Ukraine is started by NATO and is Russia's defense against NATO bullies, and, we're fully aligned with Russia. So, again, you've got a middle ground ANC with, DA saying, no, we need to be, more in line with Western partners, and and increasingly a number of African countries as well have shown their balance. Angola has voted with Western resolutions as well. So this also shows that elsewhere on Africa, people are playing it issue by issue at a time and not taking these irons, and so perhaps navigating this so-called non-alignment a little bit better. And then on Palestine, actually, there's kind of broad support across the parties. A UN resolution for the cessation of hostilities in Palestine would get voted for by ANC, EFF, DA. Actually, now much less of a contested issue, and I think partly because of, like I said at the start, the realization that this has got domestic political implications of kind of where you would stand. So there's some alignment there. There's some disagreement, but ultimately, I think that under a coalition government, you're going to see a shrinking of kind of South Africa's role in the region, a shrinking of kind of what it's wanting to do globally. But of course, in 2025, South Africa is going to chair and host the G20. And so that's something that it really needs to start thinking through. I don't think that there's a lot of thinking that's been done yet. I don't think that it really has yet got a vision of what it wants to achieve with hosting the G20. I think everyone's kind of been waiting for a new government to come in and get settled in and then decide. There are some areas where it could have provide a legitimate platform for important international discussions, particularly around climate change and green financing. That's going to be something that South Africa really can push on. It has done so before in the past, and it's something that it was a big part of the BRICS conversation last year around energy, and it's something that South Africa has to think through. It's got lots of coal-fired power stations that are nearing the end of their life. And it really needs to, attract international support. And it has a legitimate voice in questioning, well, the West has promised us all this money and it hasn't come through. So what are you going to do about it? And, South Africa, that is an area where they can put pressure. Another area is around critical minerals. It's a much more contested space. But a number of Western partners do have critical minerals partnerships with South Africa. The UK has a critical minerals partnership with South Africa. South Africa has occasionally been an observer to the MSP, the Mineral Security Partnership, which is predominantly Western. South Africa doesn't want to join because it sees it as a kind of neo-colonial thing. But, South Africa is also very prominent within the new UN panel for critical minerals. And so this is an area that it could have a role also in dispelling some of these kind of myths that not myths, but we know that there are stories around ANC receiving money from manganese mines that have Russian oligarch involvement, and within the mining industry, writ large, there are these where you get these stories of kind of individual operations in these kind of very grey and murky areas, it reflects badly on South Africa. But what South Africa really needs to do is say, actually, we've got a very good, strong, robust, historical mining industry that we're really keen to kind of keep going and, needs growth, needs a kind of a rebirth of kind of South African mining. And so those kind of issues would be, useful to play in the G20. So I've answered that question in a very, very long time. It's more of a lecture.
I think we need detail on that because that's what people from the outside want to know. Can we answer a final question? Is there going to be a reckoning in the ANC? Because Ramaphosa, all these foreign policies that you've just spelled out, he led those policies. But will they get rid of Ramaphosa?
It is very hard to remove a president of the ANC. And they did it to Mbeki, and it was very, very difficult. Zuma lost the party congress, or he didn't when you had Mbeki tried to stand to retain his position within the party and let someone else take over as national president, and the party said, no, we don't do that. Zuma lost. Well, he didn't fight, but when his ex-wife Nkosazana, when she was kind of competing against Cyril Ramaphosa in that 2017 elective campaign for the party, Zuma thought, well, if an ally of mine gets the title, I can retain an important position or within the party, and I think wanted to stay on as president of the country for longer than he did. But Ramaphosa won the presidency of the party and was then very quickly able to within a couple of months had unseated Zuma from the national presidency and took over and had that lead in time to those 2019 elections. So it's very, the power that you have in that position is very significant. And Ramaphosa is legitimately the president of the party and legitimately the president of the country, was until these elections, but he's still legitimately the president of the party. He has backing within the top 7 and backing within the NEC, the National Executive Committee. So within the party structures, there is support for President Ramaphosa, or there was kind of, of course, the damaging election result is going to, bring some of that into question. But up until this point, there has been support for Ramaphosa within those upper parts of the party. The ANC, compared to other national liberation movements in the region, is very strong on internal democracy. They really do stand by what their decisions have been. And even when you saw, the party where there was a split over the Zuma presidency, even those who were being very anti-Zuma, when it came to votes of no confidence in parliament and so on, would stand by the party line. So this is a party that is culturally sticky, pro-democracy, and also very pro-process. It likes process and adherence to those processes. So even under Ramaphosa's first time, the various rumors that, they're going to try and move against him, and at the next meeting, they're going to try and unseat him. But that never happened, and he retained that position. So I think really, it's up to Ramaphosa. If I think that the way in which he would no longer be president, most likely would be if he stepped down. And we've seen attempts before where he's perhaps wanted to step down, and those around him at the top have said, oh, no, you don't. We need you. We need you there. And so to some extent, the party didn't let him then. And, they might not let him now. So, clearly there's a lot of rumor and speculation. Clearly this is a bad electoral performance for the ANC. But these two things combined don't necessarily lead to the simple conclusion that he would go. And it would take an awful lot for that to happen, I think, in my view. So, the most likely, most probable scenario is that we, at least in the short to mid-term, we continue with a Ramaphosa presidency, but probably with a lot of thinking going into succession and his own thinking around, if this is the situation I'm now in, perhaps the last thing I can control is who the coalition partner is, and then also, how do I preside over my own succession? How do I influence who comes after me? So we're going to enter into that phase now.
It's going to be interesting, 14 days or something of uncertainty before we actually know. So, Chris Vandome, thank you so much. That was so interesting.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Linda. And we all wait with bated breath. So.